When I was getting started with Azure Functions development, the hardest thing to understand was how to use triggers and bindings, how to mix and match them to suit our needs. So I'm going to show you something that I implemented actually back in the Azure Functions, the Azure Resume Challenge. A couple months ago I hosted that, and you had to build a visitor counter utilizing Azure Functions, HTTP trigger, and Cosmos DB. Let's go ahead and create that. So let me show you what we're actually going to be making. I have this static page. It's like a landing page with my links here and a little hello, but then the important part here is this, and this page has been viewed 15 times. This number is actually what you get pull from the Cosmos DB account, and you can see we have an error because it's trying to pull our function from the local host, so it's local URL, but it doesn't exist yet, right? So I could show you the JavaScript code. Please do not flame me. I am not a JavaScript developer. Let me take a look here. So we'll move into that front end folder and we'll open this up. So in the index, we have an element here that just goes and it will sort of propagate its information depending on the value that the function is providing us here. Okay, so here, that the line is here, right? We have this element with ID counter and then the main.js. It's going to use our local functions URL, which is running on port 7071, and it's called counter. We're going to create that. We haven't created that yet. But yeah, right now it's using local function URL to grab the JSON, and then the element that's called counter, we're going to set it to the count data. Okay, so that's all we have to look in here. So let's go ahead and create our folder for our functions. We're going to say make directory function. And then we're going to cd into that function. Actually, hold on, let me take a look here. Did I do this in the right folder? Yes. Let me make sure. All right. And then we're just going to open this up. Okay. All right. First things first, with my handy dandy Azure extension, I'm going to hit new function. Then I'm going to hit the function folder. And then I'm going to hit C#. We're going to be using .NET5, HTTP trigger, and we're going to call this counter. And that namespace is fine. I'm going to set it to anonymous. Fantastic. Okay, so as the Visual Studio Code in the extension, the Azure Functions extension creates a fully functioning Azure function for you. So if we go ahead and just execute this here, we run this here, and then we visit the local functions URL, which the terminal output will provide for us. It'll work. It's going to give us a message that says, "Welcome to Azure Functions." So if I actually have that open, I believe, actually I don't. All right, let's run this. There we go. Okay, see, welcome to Azure Functions. What we want this function to do is when we go to its URL, it has to provide us the counter data. I have a Cosmos DB account already created. It's called Visitor Counter. And on the left side on Data Explorer, I'm going to hit the Visitor Counter database and then the count collection and then items. I only have one item here. The ID is 1. This column here is the partition key, which I also set to the ID, so that value will also be 1. And you see I have a count of 16, so 16 visitors already. I'm going to set that back to 1. Update it. While I'm in here, I'm going to go ahead and grab the key, the connection string. I'm going to copy that, and we'll go back into Visual Code, and we're going to stop this. We'll go to our local.settings.json where we can set environment variables for credentials and keys and such. And I'm going to say Cosmos DB connection string and provide that value that I copied from the Azure portal. Next, I'm going to give the database name, which we also need to provide. And the database name, I believe, was visitor counter, and the collection name was count. I believe it was just count, right? Yes, I'm pretty sure. We're gonna have some course stuff going on here too, so let's provide the host value here, and then we'll say local HTTP port was going to be 7071, and we'll just enable course for all. Since this is local development, just nothing production, this is fine. Obviously in production you want to change that, and this file doesn't even get uploaded to production. You have to set them in different areas, but we're not going to look at that today. So anyway, counter.cs, and to work with Cosmos DB, we have to import a package. Now I might already have it in here. Let me see. There we go. So the Microsoft Azure Functions Worker Extension Cosmos DB, which is here as well. There's packages for several of the bindings that you might want to utilize. So keep that in mind. Depending on what binding you're going to use, you'll have to use a different package. Okay, so now we can go ahead and describe the object that we're going to be working with. So we'll say public class counter JSON, and then we know that the counter has a ID, and it also has a count value, which is an int count, and we have our getters and setters for that as well. Now, since the actual JSON is lowercase, we'll have to add a property here. So JSON property, yes, name, and then we'll say it is lowercase for both these. I think we need a package. Yes, okay. And we'll go down here. And this one is actually count. I just want to make sure I did this correct here. Source is busy, okay. There we go. Let me see. Over here. Go to Data Explorer again. Visitor counter, count, items, and then we see ID, and it's count, ID and count. Okay, fantastic. Now let's go to set the actual input binding. So the input binding, what it's gonna do is when we go to that URL, so that local function URL, not only is it going to be triggered, but it's gonna go and fetch the specific item that we ask for it to get from Cosmos DB. So we'll set Cosmos DB input, and then we need to provide a couple of variables. It already tells us we need to say database name and the collection name. So we can go ahead and provide both of those values. The database name is database name, and this is referencing the values that we have in the local.settings.json file. And then we'll have collection name, and we also need to provide the connection string setting, which is Cosmos DB connection string. And we need to save this somewhere, so we'll say counter JSON counter. And we need a comma here. You know what we will need to provide are the ID of the item. The ID, which is 1 in this case, and the partition key is also 1 because we set it to be the same as the ID column. Alright, so what we're telling this function is, hey Cosmos DB, when you're triggered, also go in and give me some input data. I need you to go to this database with this name, to this collection, connect with this connection string, and find the item that has the ID of 1 and partition key 1, and then save that in this object here so I can work with it. All right. And now we can get rid of all this because we don't need to print anything to this screen. What we need to print is the actual counter object. And we should be able to, we need to change the return type there. Alrighty, if we hit run here, when we visit that local URL in the browser, it should show us the value of the counter. So if we refresh this, there we go. The issue here is every time we visit it and we refresh it, counters usually increment. This one is not doing that. So let's now set up an output binding. You know what I should have showed you is, okay. So since that JavaScript code is actually working with the local URL, so this URL here, that this URL is matching our local URL for the function. If we refresh this, this should now work. And it worked. There we go. I just needed to run it again for some reason. Not sure what happened there. But anyway, okay. So yeah, we'll see. We still get that one value. And that is the same as when we go directly to the URL. But we want this to increment like counters do. So let's go back into the code and we'll stop this here. And we now need to set up the output binding. So not only are we grabbing Cosmos DB data in, but we're also grabbing that same value. We're going to increment it 1 and give it back. It's actually very straightforward to do. We can copy the majority of this here. up to right here. And in .NET 5, we actually have to set it as an attribute up here. And we'll delete that. Then I think we're missing a parentheses here. And this is going to be Cosmos DB output. Okay, so we're telling Cosmos DB, go to this database, this collection, and this connection string, and then go ahead and update that value. We don't need to provide ID or partition key here because it is assuming that we're going to be working with some sort of item. So we'll be providing that value already inside of the code here. Okay, so now what we can do is go ahead and do counter.count ++, and there we go. So let's execute this. You know what, we'll set a breakpoint here just to make sure things are working before we take a look in the browser. And once it's running, let's go ahead and run it here. It should hit our breakpoint, yes, and we can see that our counter is 1. And then if we go to step through it and we go back to our browser, it's been increased there. So if we go back here, now our counter should be 2. Fantastic. Let's step through that. And then let's go to our landing page. And let's step through that once more. Actually, not step through that, whatever that one is. Just run, I think. Yeah, and it's working there. So what I'm actually going to do now is stop this, remove this breakpoint. And we're going to run this. And just to make sure the value is 4 right now. If we go to our Cosmos DB account and we refresh the whole thing, we should also see 4 in the Data Explorer. There, items. And there we go. It is set to 4. And this is a very straightforward way you could use of how to implement a visitor counter. But the goal really was to show you how you can mix and match these things to build your different solutions with Azure Functions.